Hey guys, this is the second video of the frequently not asked question series. This is the 750th take of this video. It's giving me a hard time, and I think it's just because it's a really cool one. I didn't think from at the beginning that it was going to be, but it is. Let me tell you what it's about. I often have conversation with my athletes and I observe them when they bring ideas to me, or when they're doing research, when they're focused on what their heroes, their idols, right? Like the athletes that they look up to, the athletes that they want to emulate. How do they train and what are they doing? And so my athletes will be like, like I saw that this guy is training this way, or is applying this training methodology, maybe we should do that, and so on. And so what I see is that if my athletes were left in a hypothetical interview with their heroes, they will ask the question of like, okay, tell me, how does your training session look like? What do you do? How do you warm up? And like, how do you train for X? Those are like the common questions that my athlete would ask themselves, and those questions drive their research when they're thinking about these problems. And for me, that's awesome. That's something that I ask myself and that I research too, right? Like I'm always researching on new methodologies and what are different athletes doing, and how are they training, and what are they learning, and so on. So this is something that is very close to my heart. However, I think when we approach this kind of research, because at the end it's just research, from this angle, we lose a lot of potential, right? We lose a lot of nuance. And for me as a researcher, the questions that you ask will determine the end product and how useful your research is going. You're training right now. Tell me your secrets. Tell me what's your secret sauce here. Is that the main motivation behind it is that what we really want to know is how can we get to be a little bit more like you, Miss or Mr. Hero of mine, right? Like, what are you doing? I want to be a little bit more like you. What are you doing so that I can get more like you? And that is a very good motivation, and that drives a particular kind of question, right? That is like, okay, what are you doing so that I can do more of that? But that is the wrong question for that motivation, because what you really want to know is, what did you do to get to where you are right now? Like, what do you do to be where you are? And that change of perspective is very useful and it's very important, because that's going to drive very different kind of questions, right? It's not anymore about what you're doing right now so that I can do it. It's more about like, hey, how did you get here? And why is that important? Because what your athlete is doing right now is not what brought her here. And what you're trying to do is like realize, hey, here's you, my idol, and here I am, and I want to shorten the distance between the two of you. So you cannot just jump and start doing what they're doing. You have to like be doing what they did before, right? And so that change in perspective is super important, and it will create very different questions. I am going to give you an example of one and some different instances of different athletes of that question, and at the end I'm going to give you different questions that expand this research. So one way to reframe that question of what are you doing right now would be like, okay, what do you know now that you wish you would have known when you were younger, when you were a younger athlete, right? Like which is the same as asking, what should I start applying? But you want to like ask the question to the athlete so that like it puts him or her in a particular position to say like, oh, this is what would have been a game changer that I know now, right? And so I went and did a little bit of research on that, and the first thing that I found was with the USA volleyball Olympic team, and I found something awesome that was very eye-opening to me, and is that there was a consensus that what those athletes wish they had knew when they were younger was the use of sunglasses and protection for your skin from the sun, sunblock, cap, whatever. a visor, which is what they use for very bad stylistic choices. That's what they wish they have done from the beginning. And it was so interesting to me. First, because I thought like all volleyball players use them, but no. And second, because it shows like the relationship between long-term and short-term mentality, right? And so the young athlete has a very short-term mentality, and is the young volleyball player, you know, like beach volleyball player, sorry about my pronunciation of the B word, wants to get rid of the sunglasses and anything that covers their field of vision, because it limits their game. And so the young athlete, and I'm saying really young in training age, not in biological age, is just can only think about present day performance. That's all they can think. And so in present day performance, yeah, the sunglasses get in the way, they cannot see very well, and so they just want to get rid of that. But the older athlete, the experienced athlete, is thinking long term. And so the longer athlete can say like, that is a little bit uncomfortable today and it's gonna decrease your performance today, but it's gonna increase your performance over time. And if you take better care of your eyes and your skin, you're gonna be able to play better for longer, which is gonna give you more results. So that very simple example where sunglasses from the beginning and, you know, like protect your skin was so important to me. The second example came from David Goggins, right? And so this is what the internet called the toughest man in the world and whatever. And he's very famous. He's a very famous ultra marathoner that is particularly famous because of their mental toughness aspect, right? Like the stories of him like breaking, running with duct tape because he had he has stress fracture all over his feet and shins, and so he duct tapes his legs and keeps going. This is a Navy SEAL guy, right? And so among other important ranks in the military, right? Like, so it's a very macho militaristic thing of go through pain and so on, and he's very famous for that. However, in his latest book, Can't Hurt Me, the first like 19 chapters are all about that kind of thing, but the last chapter is about stretching and how all this thing broke his body until like he was almost dead. Those are his words. He felt he was going to die, and then by stretching he regained his health and his ability to perform, and like now stretching is his main of training, and prioritizing range of motion is everything, and now he can run faster than ever and so on, right? And so what is outstanding to me is that he wished he had known stretching from the beginning, and yet the juxtaposition is so interesting. What he's known for is like walks through pain, and what he has discovered at old age is like, maybe I didn't have to develop so much the working through pain if I had stretched a little bit more. And I just wonder how much better his performance would have been when he was younger, if he could combine both, right? Like he would have been a tremendous athlete, even more than he already is, right? And so just learning that value of stretching, which is again not something that in the macho fitness world we value enough, and it's a very common narrative among older athletes, right? Like it's very interesting for me how experienced athletes learn at the end the value of self-care, just like volleyball players, right? Like just learn the value of wearing sunglasses. It's gonna take you a little bit more of work, it's gonna diminish your performance in the short term, but in the long term it's gonna make you a lot better. Third example comes from Sarah True. She was fourth in the Olympic triathlon, in the first Olympic triathlon in the history, I think that was London 2012. She has a fantastic story in which she's talking with another fellow triathlete. She asks him like, okay dude, what are you gonna do today? And he tells her, well, I'm not gonna train that much today because I have a 3-year-old son and he hasn't been sleeping, so I have to decrease my amount of training for this week. And he tells this story to tell young athletes, and again young in terms of training life, that's a skill that she learned as she grew up as an athlete, right? That instead of being obsessed on like, oh, I have to be the best athlete, if I don't sleep I still get my training session done, and obsess over that, knowing that like if you didn't sleep very well, you actually have to decrease your session for the next day, and having the maturity and the mental fortitude to do that is such a good it's like it's what she wish the younger athlete knew, right? Because this is very productive. And so training less when the stressors of your life are bigger, that's one of the things that like she wish she could knew when she was younger, how that is more productive. And that is something that like most of my athletes will, like they will not do. Most of my athletes will actually do the opposite. When they're really stressed and eating less, and sleeping less, they tend to amp up the training as like a little bit as a compensation strategy. And the last example is by Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, mythic Bucks and Lakers player who will define youth in athletes as being impatient, right? And so for him, the most important thing will be to be patient, to wait, to let things get longer, right? And so that is yet another lesson there that he wish he knew when he was a younger athlete. These are just a few examples, of course. You can find more, but like the question of what are you doing now will have not given you these results, and the question what wish you have done when you were younger will yield you these results that can be very, very productive in training and can guarantee that you maximize your potential. Now I'm gonna finish with other questions that I think will help guide your research, right? Like, and so the first, if you led me with an athlete that I admire and that I would like to emulate somehow, the first question that I would ask them is like, if you were in my position, how would you train? What would you do? Right? Because that's really what you want to know. You don't want to train like them. You want to like use their experience and their expertise to know what you to do yourself. So if you were in my position, what would you do? Where would you put your effort? Right? Like that's the first question, and that is a question that like cannot be researched all that much. Like you will have to ask them directly, which is cool. Like I'm sure if you write a couple of emails, you'll be surprised of how many people will respond to you. The second question is the one that I was already showing you, but like if you frame it differently, you will get different answers. So what is one lesson you learned when you were old that you wish you knew when you were young? The examples that I give you before were all in this category, but just putting it in terms of like one lesson and like being very specific will give you more specific answers which are useful. What would you do differently when you were younger, right? Like that is also a very important question, instead of like what are you doing right now. One other good question is what do you admire from your younger self? And that one is very important because you also want to know what brought them where they are. What brought you here is still a very valid question, and what are they valuing from that younger self is gonna be very important. And then the last one that I will ask them, that I think is a good question, is what makes a good athlete for you? Why do I ask that question? Because what I find out, for example, when I'm working with my athletes that are like I'm doing mental training or something, they often will get insecure, and they often will get worried that they're not doing the right thing. And the way that I have to land them to be like, hey, are you doing the right thing or not, is to ask them, like, let's say they're worried about like their work performance. I ask them like, okay, how does a good worker look for you? And they tell me like, a person that does this and that. And I'm like, are you doing that? And they're like, yeah. And so that question always lands the athlete and tells you what that athlete values. And that often doesn't coincide with the way they behave. Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't, but it's a very grounding question. And so that question will help you understand what is it that they're seeing, and seeing if that coincides with you, because sometimes what you value and what they value is different. So the lessons that they're learning might not apply to you, and that's also important, right? And so what makes a good athlete, not just to be that athlete, but to know and check if what they see and what you're seeing is the same. It's gonna ground them, and it's gonna ground you, and it's gonna ground your reflections and your research around this hero that you have, right? Because with heroes and with people that we look up to, we tend to romanticize, to have a romantic view of them, right? My cat is here somewhere. Anyhow, so those are questions that are frequently not asked and that frequently don't guide our research. That I think if you let them guide your research, is gonna make you understand your heroes better, and it's gonna make the whole thing more productive. And if you get the chance to interview one of your heroes, well, let me know, because I will want to see that or read that or hear that or watch that, in whichever is the medium that you're gonna do that. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you soon.